The maintenance crew noticed the scattered belongings first. A black leather purse lay open beside the granite headstone, its contents spilled across the freshly cut grass like debris from a car accident. Car keys glinted in the morning light, attached to a keychain that read, "Forever and Always," in faded gold lettering. A bouquet of white roses had been carefully arranged at the base of the stone, their stems still damp from the florist's cooler. The cellophane wrapping was torn and tangled in nearby shrubs, as if it had been ripped away by wind or struggle. Sarah Katherine Mitchell was nowhere to be found. The headstone read, "Daniel James Mitchell, beloved husband, 1,992 to 2,016 inches, in simple black letters, carved into polished granite." The grave sat in Section C of Riverside Memorial Park, a well-maintained cemetery on the outskirts of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Rolling hills dotted with oak trees stretched across 40 acres of manicured grass, broken by neat rows of headstones that marked the final resting places of 3 generations of local families. The plot had been purchased hastily in December 2016, after a drunk driver ran a red light and killed Daniel on his way home from work 3 days before Christmas. Sarah had been visiting the grave every morning since the funeral. At 24, she was the youngest regular visitor the cemetery staff had ever seen. Her blonde hair was always pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore the same navy blue jacket regardless of weather. The routine never varied. She arrived at 8:15 a.m., parked her silver Honda Civic in the visitor lot, and walked the 200 yards to Daniel's grave, carrying fresh flowers and a small cleaning kit. She would spend exactly 1 hour at the site, replacing the previous day's flowers, polishing the headstone with a soft cloth, and pulling any weeds that had sprouted around the edges of the plot. The cemetery staff knew her schedule with the precision of a Swiss watch. Groundskeeper Miguel Santos had watched her from a distance for months, noting how she always sat on the small stone bench beside the grave for the final 15 minutes of each visit. She never spoke aloud, never broke down in tears like many of the other visitors. She simply sat in silence, staring at the engraved dates that marked the beginning and end of her husband's 24 years on Earth. Her hands remained folded in her lap, her posture straight and formal, as if she were attending a church service that never ended. Sarah and Daniel had been married for 8 months when he died. They had dated since sophomore year at Millbrook High School, postponed their wedding twice to save money for a small house, and finally held a ceremony at the community center in April 2016. The guest list included 43 people. The reception featured a DJ who played classic rock and a 3-tier cake from the local grocery store bakery. Photos from the wedding showed Sarah in a simple white dress with long sleeves and a modest neckline. Her smile was radiant, her eyes bright with the kind of happiness that comes from marrying your high school sweetheart at 23. The accident happened on December 22nd, 2016, at 9:47 p.m. Daniel was driving home from his job at Morrison's Automotive Parts Warehouse when a Ford F-150 ran the red light at the intersection of Route 15 and Mill Street. The impact crushed the driver's side of Daniel's Honda Accord, killing him instantly. The drunk driver, a 52-year-old construction worker named Brett Kowalski, walked away with minor injuries and a blood alcohol content of 0.18. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated, a sentence that Sarah's family considered inadequate but legally binding. Sarah's world collapsed in the space of a phone call. She had been wrapping Christmas presents in their apartment when the Pennsylvania State Police knocked on the door at 11:47 p.m. Officer Jennifer Walsh had delivered the news with professional compassion, explaining that Daniel had been pronounced dead at the scene. The wrapped presents remained under their small, artificial tree for 3 months after the funeral, visible through the living room window to neighbors who noticed the static tableau of interrupted celebration. The young widow found a studio apartment closer to the cemetery in March 2017. The building was a converted Victorian house that had been divided into 4 units, painted pale yellow with white trim and surrounded by overgrown lilac bushes. Sarah's apartment was on the 2nd floor, with a view of the cemetery's wrought iron gates from her bedroom window. She could see the entrance from her bed, could watch the morning visitors arrive with their flowers and cleaning supplies, could time her own departure to avoid encountering other mourners. Sarah's routine began immediately after the move. Every morning at 8:15 a.m., she would lock her apartment door and walk the 2 blocks to Riverside Memorial Park. She carried the same black leather purse that Daniel had given her for their first anniversary, drove the same silver Honda Civic they had purchased together 6 months before the wedding, and purchased flowers from Chen's flower shop 3 blocks away. Mrs. Chen, the elderly owner, would have white roses waiting for her every morning, wrapped in clear cellophane and tied with a white ribbon. Sarah never ordered different flowers, never requested a different arrangement, never varied from the ritual that had become the organizing principle of her new life. The cemetery's security cameras captured her arrival on the morning of September 28, 2017. The timestamp read 8:14 a.m. when her Honda Civic passed through the main gates, 1 minute earlier than usual. The vehicle appeared normal in the grainy footage, Sarah visible in the driver's seat as a blonde figure hunched over the steering wheel. No passengers, no unusual cargo, no sign of distress or deviation from routine. She parked in her usual spot in the 3rd row from the entrance, always leaving 2 empty spaces between her car and the next vehicle, a quirk that the parking lot attendant had noticed but never questioned. The walk to Daniel's grave took exactly 4 minutes at Sarah's measured pace. Her path never varied from the route she had established during her first visit in December 2016. She would exit the parking lot through the main gate, follow the paved road for 150 yards past the cemetery office, then turn right onto the gravel path that led to Section C. The grave sat beneath a large oak tree, 15 feet from the path, in the 3rd row of headstones from the cemetery's eastern fence. The location provided privacy while remaining visible to staff members conducting their daily maintenance rounds. Miguel Santos was trimming hedges near the maintenance shed when Sarah arrived that morning. He noticed her immediately because she was carrying something different. In addition to her usual purse and flowers, she had a small canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The bag appeared heavy, causing her to walk more slowly than usual and shift the strap every few steps to redistribute the weight. She paused twice during her walk to the grave, setting the bag down and stretching her shoulder before continuing. Santos had worked at the cemetery for 12 years and prided himself on noticing details that might indicate problems or security concerns. The canvas bag was olive green with brown leather straps, military surplus style, approximately 12 inches long and 8 inches wide. Santos observed that it appeared to be made of heavy material and was packed full, creating a rigid rectangular shape that suggested it contained tools or equipment rather than personal items. Sarah had never carried anything other than her purse and flowers during her previous visits, making the addition of the bag a notable deviation from her established routine. Santos completed his hedge trimming and moved on to mowing the grass near the cemetery's main entrance. The industrial mower was loud, its engine drowning out most other sounds, including conversation, footsteps, and the normal ambient noise of the cemetery grounds. He worked for approximately 45 minutes, cutting parallel strips across the rolling lawn while keeping one eye on the visitors scattered throughout the property. The work was meditative and familiar, allowing his mind to wander while his hands guided the machine across terrain he had traversed thousands of times. At 9:35 a.m., Santos stopped the mower for a scheduled break near the office building. From this vantage point, he could see most of Section C, including the area around Daniel's grave beneath the oak tree. Sarah's Honda Civic was still in the parking lot, positioned exactly as she had left it nearly 90 minutes earlier. The car sat in the morning sun, with its windows up and doors apparently locked, showing no signs of disturbance or hasty departure. Santos could see no movement around the vehicle, no indication that Sarah was walking back from her visit or preparing to leave. He checked his watch, 9:35 a.m. Sarah's visits typically lasted exactly 1 hour, a schedule so precise that Santos had unconsciously begun to expect her departure at 9:15 a.m. each morning. The extended visit was unusual, but not necessarily alarming. Grief followed no schedule, and Santos had seen other visitors spend entire days at grave sites during anniversaries or holidays. Still, something about the morning felt different. The canvas bag, the early arrival, the extended visit's small deviations that created a pattern of unease in Santos's mind. At 9:45 a.m., Santos decided to check on her. He had never approached Sarah during her visits, respecting the privacy that seemed essential to her grieving process. But the combination of factors, the unusual bag, the delayed departure, the agitated crows he could now see circling the oak tree, created enough concern to justify breaking his usual policy of non-interference. The cemetery was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic on Route 15 and the harsh cawing of the birds overhead. Santos walked toward Section C, following the same gravel path that Sarah took each morning. The distance was approximately 300 yards from the maintenance area, a walk that took him past dozens of other graves and monuments. The morning air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and fallen leaves crunched under his work boots as he approached the oak tree. The crows were unusually agitated, diving at something below the branches and cawing loudly enough to disturb the cemetery's normally peaceful atmosphere. He found Sarah's belongings scattered around the headstone in a pattern that suggested either violence or extreme haste. Her black leather purse lay open 3 feet from the grave marker, its contents spilled across the grass in a rough semicircle. Lipstick, car keys, a wallet, breath mints, and several receipts were scattered within a 6-foot radius of the grave. The white roses had been arranged at the base of the headstone, but the cellophane wrapping was torn and tangled in the nearby shrubs as if it had been ripped away by strong wind or physical struggle. The canvas bag lay empty beside the stone bench, where Sarah always sat during the final minutes of her visits. Santos examined it briefly without touching, noting that it was made of heavy canvas material with leather straps and brass buckles. The bag smelled strongly of dirt and metal, odors that suggested it had recently contained tools or equipment related to digging or construction. The interior was stained with what appeared to be soil, and small particles of dirt were visible in the seams and corners. Santos did not touch any of the other scattered items, instead returning immediately to the maintenance shed to call the Millbrook Police Department. His hands shook as he dialed 911, partly from adrenaline and partly from the growing certainty that something terrible had happened to the young woman he had watched grieve her husband for nearly 10 months. The dispatcher took his report with professional efficiency, requesting specific details about the location, the scattered belongings, and the timeline of Sarah's visit. The Millbrook Police Department received the call at 10:17 a.m. Officer Jennifer Walsh was the first to arrive, the same officer who had delivered the news of Daniel's death to Sarah 9 months earlier. Walsh recognized the location immediately and felt a familiar knot of dread in her stomach as she parked her patrol car near the cemetery office. Detective Ray Hoffman arrived 20 minutes later, followed by additional officers and the county coroner's investigator. Both officers were familiar with Sarah's routine, from months of morning patrols through the cemetery. Walsh had seen her Honda Civic in the parking lot countless times, had occasionally waved to the young widow from a distance, and had made mental notes about her consistent schedule and solitary grieving process. Hoffman had interviewed her briefly during the investigation of Daniel's accident, documenting her whereabouts on the night of the crash and her relationship with the deceased. The initial examination of the scene revealed several puzzling elements. Sarah's car keys were among the scattered items, but her vehicle remained locked in the parking lot, with no signs of forced entry or disturbance. The Honda Civic's interior was neat and undisturbed, with Sarah's work clothes hanging from a hook behind the passenger seat and a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. The car showed no evidence of struggle, hasty departure, or third-party involvement. Detective Hoffman noted the meticulous arrangement of the white roses at the base of Daniel's headstone, a detail that suggested Sarah had completed at least part of her normal routine before whatever had caused her disappearance. The flowers were positioned exactly as they had been on previous visits, with the stems aligned parallel to the headstone and the blooms facing outward toward the gravel path. This careful arrangement contradicted the chaotic scattering of her personal belongings, creating a timeline puzzle that would never be satisfactorily resolved. The cemetery's office provided detailed maps and records that helped establish the scope of the search area. Riverside Memorial Park covered 40 acres, with approximately 8,000 graves arranged in 12 lettered sections. The property included a small pond fed by natural springs, several wooded areas that had been left undeveloped to preserve the natural landscape, and a network of maintenance roads that connected to the surrounding residential neighborhoods. The cemetery was surrounded by a 6-foot wrought iron fence with gates at 3 locations, all of which were equipped with security cameras. Search teams arrived within 2 hours of the initial call. The Millbrook Police Department requested assistance from the county sheriff's office, the Pennsylvania State Police, and volunteer search and rescue organizations from 3 neighboring counties. 12 officers and 24 volunteers conducted a systematic grid search of the cemetery grounds, examining every section with the thoroughness usually reserved for crime scenes. They found no additional evidence of Sarah's presence or disappearance. The search expanded beyond the cemetery boundaries to include the surrounding residential neighborhoods, commercial areas, and rural farmland. Officers knocked on doors throughout the morning, questioning residents about unusual activity, suspicious vehicles, or sightings of a young blonde woman in a navy blue jacket. The investigation revealed that Sarah had been seen walking to the cemetery that morning by several neighbors, but no one had witnessed her leaving the grounds or interacting with other individuals. The timing of Sarah's disappearance fell within a narrow window between 8:30 a.m., when Santos had last seen her walking toward Daniel's grave, and 9:35 a.m., when he had first noticed the extended duration of her visit. This 65-minute period became the focus of intense investigation, with detectives attempting to reconstruct every moment of Sarah's final hour at the cemetery. Security footage from the cemetery's 3 entrance gates showed no vehicles leaving the property during the critical time period. The cameras, installed 6 months earlier in response to vandalism concerns, captured clear images of every car that entered or exited the grounds. Sarah's Honda Civic was the only vehicle associated with her that appeared in the footage, and it had not moved from its parking space since her arrival at 8:14 a.m. Sarah's family arrived from Pittsburgh that afternoon, making the 4-hour drive after receiving a phone call from Detective Hoffman. Her parents, Robert and Linda Patterson, had spoken to their daughter by phone the previous evening in a conversation that lasted approximately 15 minutes. Sarah had mentioned her plans to visit Daniel's grave the following morning, as she did every day, and had discussed her work schedule at the medical billing company where she was employed part-time. Nothing in her tone or words had suggested unusual stress, depression, or intention to leave. The family provided investigators with detailed information about Sarah's mental state, daily routine, and recent behavior. She had been seeing a grief counselor, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, at a clinic in nearby Harrisburg since February 2017. The weekly sessions focused on helping Sarah process her grief and begin planning for her future beyond the immediate aftermath of Daniel's death. Dr. Morrison described Sarah as deeply sad, but not suicidal, committed to her daily routine, but showing gradual signs of healing and acceptance. Robert Patterson, Sarah's father, noted that his daughter had been making subtle changes to her routine in the weeks before her disappearance. She had been asking questions about cemetery policies, burial procedures, and the legal requirements for visiting graves. She had also been spending longer periods at Daniel's grave, sometimes arriving earlier than usual or staying past her normal departure time. These changes had concerned her parents, but they had attributed them to the approaching first anniversary of Daniel's death. The investigation revealed additional details about Sarah's recent behavior that painted a picture of increasing preoccupation with the cemetery and burial practices. Mrs. Chen, the florist, mentioned that Sarah had been asking questions about different types of flowers, specifically about plants that could survive underground or in low-light conditions. Sarah had also been inquiring about the symbolic meanings of various flowers and their traditional associations with death and remembrance. The cemetery's office manager, Patricia Wellness, recalled several conversations with Sarah during early September 2017. Sarah had asked detailed questions about the depth of graves, the type of soil used for backfill, and the cemetery's policies regarding personal items buried with the deceased. She had inquired about the drainage systems, the location of underground utilities, and the structural integrity of burial plots. Wellness had assumed that Sarah was planning to bury something meaningful with Daniel, a practice that was common but not officially encouraged by cemetery policy. Sarah had also been visiting the cemetery's research library, a small collection of local historical documents and genealogical records housed in the basement of the administration building. The librarian, Eleanor Hartwell, remembered Sarah spending hours examining old cemetery maps, burial records, and architectural plans dating back to the cemetery's founding in 1923. Sarah had been particularly interested in the soil composition reports and engineering surveys that had been conducted before construction began on various sections of the property. The search continued for 3 full days, expanding to cover a 5-mile radius around the cemetery. Teams with metal detectors swept the entire cemetery grounds, methodically examining every section for buried objects or disturbed soil. The work was slow and painstaking, complicated by the presence of legitimate burials, underground utilities, and decades of accumulated metal debris from maintenance activities. Divers from the State Police Underwater Recovery Team searched the small pond in the cemetery's northeast corner. The pond was approximately 50 feet in diameter and 12 feet deep at its center, fed by natural springs that kept the water clear and cold year-round. The divers found no evidence of Sarah's presence, though they recovered several items of historical interest, including old headstones that had apparently been discarded in the water decades earlier. Volunteers from the community joined the search effort, forming long lines to systematically examine the wooded areas beyond the cemetery's boundaries. The Pennsylvania State Police brought in a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment to search the surrounding farmland, looking for heat signatures that might indicate a person in distress or recently disturbed earth that could suggest a burial site. The aerial search covered approximately 20 square miles of rural Pennsylvania, including abandoned farms, wooded areas, and industrial sites that could potentially serve as hiding places or disposal locations. The thermal imaging equipment detected several anomalies that required ground investigation, but none proved to be related to Sarah's disappearance. No trace of Sarah was found during the initial search period. The effort was officially suspended on October 1st, 2017, though the investigation remained active under Detective Hoffman's supervision. The decision to scale back the search was difficult but necessary, as the department's resources were stretched thin and the likelihood of finding Sarah alive decreased with each passing day. The case was featured prominently in local newspapers and on regional television news programs. Sarah's photograph, a formal portrait from her wedding to Daniel, appeared on missing person flyers distributed throughout central Pennsylvania. The image showed a young woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and bright blue eyes, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed her life was just beginning. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. The residents of Millbrook, a town of approximately 3,500 people, organized vigils in the town square, distributed flyers at shopping centers and truck stops, and established a reward fund for information leading to Sarah's safe return. The story of the young widow who vanished from her husband's grave resonated deeply with the small town's population, many of whom had known Sarah and Daniel since childhood. Local churches held prayer services for Sarah's safe return, and the high school where she and Daniel had graduated organized a memorial assembly. The couple's former classmates shared memories of their relationship, describing them as high school sweethearts who had planned to grow old together in the town where they had been born. The tragedy of Daniel's death, followed by Sarah's disappearance, seemed to embody every parent's worst fears about the fragility of young love and the randomness of loss. Carmen Mitchell, Daniel's younger sister, became the family's primary spokesperson. She appeared on local television programs, maintained a Facebook page dedicated to finding Sarah, and organized weekly searches of areas not covered by law enforcement. Carmen described Sarah as a devoted wife who had been struggling with profound grief but had never expressed any intention to hurt herself or disappear voluntarily. The family firmly rejected the possibility that Sarah had committed suicide or run away to start a new life. They pointed to her stable employment, her close relationships with family members, and her apparent commitment to honoring Daniel's memory through her daily visits to his grave. The idea that she would abandon this routine voluntarily seemed inconsistent with everything they knew about her character and emotional state. As autumn turned to winter, the active search efforts gradually diminished. The media coverage decreased, volunteers returned to their normal routines, and the community's attention shifted to other concerns. Sarah's parents continued to visit Millbrook regularly, maintaining contact with Detective Hoffman and distributing flyers in surrounding communities. The reward fund grew to $25,000, funded by donations from throughout the region and beyond. Detective Hoffman continued to follow up on tips and potential sightings, but none produced concrete evidence about Sarah's whereabouts. The investigation had generated dozens of leads, ranging from credible reports to obvious hoaxes, but each was systematically investigated and ultimately ruled out. The case file grew thick with witness statements, search reports, and forensic analyses that painted a detailed picture of Sarah's final morning, but offered no explanation for her disappearance. The first anniversary of Sarah's disappearance brought renewed media attention and a fresh wave of investigative effort. Television news crews returned to Millbrook to film updates on the case, interviewing family members, law enforcement officials, and community volunteers who had participated in the search. The story was featured on a popular true crime podcast, bringing national attention to Sarah's case and generating hundreds of new tips from across the country. The increased exposure produced dozens of potential sightings and leads, but none proved to be credible upon investigation. Several women matching Sarah's description had been spotted in various locations, but follow-up investigations revealed cases of mistaken identity or deliberate hoaxes. The national attention also attracted conspiracy theorists and amateur investigators who proposed elaborate theories about Sarah's disappearance, most of which were quickly debunked by law enforcement. During this period, Sarah's family made a disturbing discovery while completing the difficult task of cleaning out her apartment. The studio had remained largely untouched since her disappearance, preserved as both a crime scene and a shrine to their missing daughter. Hidden beneath the mattress was a small spiral notebook filled with hand-drawn diagrams, measurements, and calculations that revealed the extent of Sarah's planning and obsession. The notebook contained detailed drawings of cemetery plots, specifically focusing on Section C and the area around Daniel's grave. The diagrams showed precise measurements between headstones, the exact location of underground utilities, and calculations related to soil depth and drainage patterns. The drawings were executed with architectural precision, suggesting that Sarah had been conducting her own detailed survey of the cemetery grounds during her daily visits. The notebook also contained a chronological list of dates, all falling within the month before Sarah's disappearance. Next to each date was a brief notation describing weather conditions, soil moisture, and the presence or absence of other visitors in Section C. The entries suggested that Sarah had been systematically collecting information about optimal conditions for some kind of excavation project. Most disturbing were the calculations scattered throughout the notebook's pages. Sarah had been researching air consumption rates, survival times in confined spaces, and the structural requirements for underground chambers. The mathematical notations were precise and methodical, suggesting extensive research into the physics and biology of underground survival. Detective Hoffman submitted the notebook to the State Police Crime Lab for comprehensive analysis. The ink was confirmed to match pens found in Sarah's apartment, and handwriting experts verified that all entries had been made by Sarah herself. The dates in the notebook corresponded exactly to Sarah's known visits to the cemetery, confirming that she had been taking measurements and conducting observations during her daily routine. The notebook's contents fundamentally changed the investigation's direction. What had been treated as a missing person case with possible foul play was now clearly a planned disappearance with Sarah as the architect of her own vanishing. The evidence suggested that she had been planning some form of self-burial for at least a month before her disappearance, using her daily visits to gather the technical information necessary to implement her plan. Detective Hoffman obtained a court order for a more thorough search of the cemetery grounds, specifically focusing on the area around Daniel's grave. The search would involve ground-penetrating radar, professional excavation equipment, and forensic archaeologists experienced in careful excavation of human remains. The technology and expertise had not been available during the initial investigation, but the notebook's revelations justified the expense and complexity of an enhanced search effort. The enhanced search began on March 15, 2018, exactly 2 years after Daniel's death and nearly 6 months after Sarah's disappearance. The timing was intentional, chosen to coincide with what would have been the couple's second wedding anniversary and the symbolic significance of the date in their relationship. The search team included technicians with ground-penetrating radar equipment, archaeologists from Penn State University, and representatives from the county medical examiner's office. The ground-penetrating radar revealed several significant anomalies in the soil around Daniel's grave. The most prominent finding was a void space approximately 6 feet below the surface, directly adjacent to the existing burial plot. The void appeared to be roughly the size and shape of a human body, suggesting that someone had created an unauthorized burial chamber in the space beside Daniel's coffin. Additional anomalies included areas of disturbed soil, buried objects that appeared to be tools or equipment, and what the radar operators described as possible structural elements, wooden boards or metal frameworks that seemed designed to reinforce an excavated space. The pattern of disturbances suggested careful planning and methodical execution rather than hasty or accidental digging. The excavation process was meticulous and time-consuming, designed to preserve any evidence while avoiding disturbance to Daniel's legitimate burial site. The team worked with archaeological precision, removing soil in careful layers and documenting every discovery with photographs and detailed measurements. The work attracted significant media attention, with television crews and newspaper reporters maintaining a respectful distance while documenting the search. At a depth of 4 feet, the excavation team made their first significant discovery. Sarah's canvas bag was buried in the soil, along with a small hand shovel, a battery-powered lantern, and several bottles of water. The items were arranged carefully rather than scattered, suggesting they had been placed with deliberate intention rather than dropped during a struggle or accident. The canvas bag still contained traces of the dirt and metal odors that Miguel Santos had noticed on the morning of Sarah's disappearance. Inside the bag, investigators found additional tools, including a measuring tape, work gloves, and plastic bags containing various supplies. The organization and condition of the items suggested they had been used recently and buried as part of a planned sequence of activities. The excavation continued with increasing anticipation and dread. At 6 feet depth, the standard depth for adult burials, the team encountered wooden boards that had been arranged to create a small chamber adjacent to Daniel's coffin. The chamber was approximately 3 feet wide, 6 feet long, and 18 inches high, just large enough to accommodate a human body in a lying position. Inside the chamber, they found Sarah Katherine Mitchell. Her body was positioned on its side, facing toward Daniel's burial site, wearing the white wedding dress she had worn during their ceremony in April 2016. The dress was immediately recognizable to her family, who had last seen it carefully preserved in a sealed box in her parents' attic in Pittsburgh. How Sarah had obtained the dress remained a mystery that would never be satisfactorily explained. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment suggested that Sarah had died from asphyxiation, consistent with being buried alive in a confined space with limited air supply. However, the physical evidence raised as many questions as it answered. The wooden chamber showed signs of careful construction, with boards arranged to provide structural support and prevent immediate collapse. The chamber had been designed to provide a temporary air supply, suggesting that Sarah had survived underground for some period before succumbing to oxygen depletion. The investigation into the circumstances of Sarah's death revealed the disturbing extent of her planning and preparation. Additional searches of her apartment uncovered hidden supplies, including rope, additional tools, and a detailed written plan for her own burial. The plan included calculations for air supply based on the chamber's volume, estimates of survival time under various conditions, and specific instructions for the excavation and construction process. The written plan also included a letter addressed to her family, explaining her decision to join Daniel in death. The letter expressed Sarah's belief that she could not continue living without her husband, and her desperate hope that they would be reunited in whatever existence followed death. The document was signed and dated September 27, 2017, the day before her disappearance, confirming that her plan had been finalized and that she had been mentally prepared to implement it. The letter revealed the depth of Sarah's grief and her inability to envision a future without Daniel. She wrote about the emptiness of waking up each morning without him, the pointlessness of planning for a life they would never share, and her belief that their love transcended physical death. The document was heartbreaking in its sincerity and devastating in its finality. The investigation concluded that Sarah had implemented her plan on the morning of September 28th, arriving at the cemetery with the equipment necessary to complete her self-burial. The timing had been calculated to coincide with the period when the cemetery was least likely to be disturbed by other visitors or staff activities. She had worked quickly and methodically to excavate the chamber beside Daniel's coffin, then positioned herself inside and somehow managed to cover the opening with soil. The physical evidence supported this conclusion, but several aspects of the case remained unexplained and deeply troubling. The most puzzling question involved the wedding dress Sarah was found wearing. Her family was certain that the dress had been stored in a sealed box in their attic in Pittsburgh, approximately 200 miles from Millbrook. The box had not been disturbed, and her parents had no knowledge of Sarah visiting their home to retrieve the dress. The dress was in excellent condition, despite being buried underground for 6 months. It showed no signs of decomposition, staining, or damage that would be expected from prolonged exposure to soil and moisture. The preservation suggested that it had been protected in some way, though no evidence of protective wrapping or treatment was found in the burial chamber. The investigation also struggled to explain how Sarah had managed to cover herself with dirt once she was positioned in the chamber. The excavation site showed that approximately 2 cubic yards of soil had been used to fill the space above her body and create the appearance of undisturbed ground. The physical demands of moving this much dirt would have been significant, particularly for someone working alone in a confined underground space. Detective Hoffman's final report acknowledged these inconsistencies while concluding that Sarah had taken her own life in an elaborate suicide designed to place her remains as close as possible to her deceased husband. The case was officially closed in June 2018, classified as a suicide with unusual circumstances. The unexplained elements were noted, but not considered sufficient to keep the investigation active. The cemetery administration made the decision to leave both bodies undisturbed in their final resting place. Sarah's family agreed to have her remains officially interred in the plot adjacent to Daniel's grave, creating a permanent double burial that honored their wish to be together in death. A new headstone was installed, reading Sarah Katherine Mitchell, beloved wife, 1,993 to 2,017 inches, with the inscription, forever and always, matching the keychain found among her scattered belongings. The case attracted attention from researchers studying extreme expressions of grief and the psychology of suicide. Sarah's elaborate plan was examined as an example of how profound loss can lead to carefully calculated self-destruction, challenging assumptions about impulsive versus planned suicidal behavior. The technical complexity of her plan suggested a level of determination and preparation that contradicted conventional understanding of grief-driven suicide. The attention brought unwanted notoriety to Millbrook and Riverside Memorial Park. The cemetery eventually installed additional security measures, including motion sensors, improved lighting, and more comprehensive camera coverage to prevent similar incidents. The administration also implemented new policies requiring verification of identity for anyone requesting detailed information about burial procedures or cemetery operations. 5 years after Sarah's disappearance, the case continues to generate questions and theories from true crime enthusiasts and amateur investigators. The wedding dress remains the most compelling piece of unexplained evidence, suggesting either that Sarah had assistance from an unknown accomplice or that she had somehow retrieved the dress from her parents' home without their knowledge. Both possibilities seem unlikely given the investigation's findings, creating a persistent mystery at the heart of an otherwise resolved case. The physical logistics of Sarah's burial also continue to puzzle experts who have studied the case. The amount of soil that needed to be moved, the precision of the excavation, and the construction of the wooden chamber all suggest capabilities beyond what would be expected from a grieving young woman working alone. These inconsistencies have fueled speculation about possible assistance, though no evidence of a third party has ever been identified. The investigation consumed thousands of hours of police work and cost the county an estimated $300,000 in search and excavation expenses. The case was featured in numerous true crime documentaries, podcasts, and television programs, making Sarah Mitchell one of the most well-known missing person cases in Pennsylvania history. The story continues to resonate with people who have experienced profound loss, serving as both a cautionary tale about isolated grief and a testament to the power of love that transcends death. Today, visitors to Riverside Memorial Park can see the joint headstone marking the graves of Daniel and Sarah Mitchell. The site is often decorated with flowers left by strangers who have learned about the couple's story through media coverage. The cemetery staff reports that the grave has become an unofficial memorial for people dealing with their own experiences of loss and grief, a place where the boundaries between love and obsession, devotion and destruction, are rendered visible in granite and earth. The case file remains in Detective Hoffman's office, thick with witness statements, forensic reports, and photographs that document one of the most unusual investigations in the department's history. The official conclusion stands. Sarah Katherine Mitchell took her own life in a carefully planned suicide designed to reunite her with her deceased husband. But the questions persist, nagging details that refuse to fit neatly into any explanation. If Sarah planned and executed her own burial with such meticulous detail, how did she obtain the wedding dress that was supposedly secured in her parents' attic 200 miles away? And if she had help, from family, friends, or strangers moved by her story, why has no one ever come forward to explain the truth behind her final, desperate act of love?